Ardennes Forest, Belgium, December 1944. Snow fell thick as silence. Broken trees marked the path where tanks had passed hours earlier. Beneath them, the forest floor was littered with the wounded, Americans and Germans, indistinguishable beneath frozen mud and blood. From the haze, a jeep bearing a red cross crawled forward. Its tires slipped on ice, headlights dim behind canvas covers. Two medics stepped out, unarmed, carrying stretchers through shell craters still steaming from impact. They reached a German soldier clutching his leg, eyes wide with terror. Expecting execution, he whispered a prayer. Instead, an American medic knelt, tore open a morphine syringe and pressed it gently against his arm. For the first time that day, the forest was quiet, not from death, but from mercy. By the winter of 1944, Europe had become a continent of ruins. Hitler's armies, cornered on the Western Front, launched a desperate counterattack through Belgium's Ardennes, the last great German offensive of the war. It would become known as the Battle of the Bulge, fought in snow, fog, and unrelenting cold. American infantry divisions, the 99th, the 106th, and the 101st Airborne, held the line under constant artillery fire. Medical units moved with them, their mission clear: treat the wounded, no matter the uniform. The U.S. Army Medical Department, guided by the 1929 Geneva Convention, trained medics to view all wounded as patients, not enemies. It was a doctrine rooted not in sentiment, but in order, the belief that discipline, even in compassion, preserved the humanity of an army. In field hospitals set up in barns, churches, and frozen tents, medics worked beside flickering lanterns, sleeves rolled, hands trembling from cold and exhaustion. They transfused blood plasma, amputated shattered limbs, and stitched torn flesh with thread meant for boots. To them, every man who breathed was worth saving. American or German, it made no difference under the Red Cross. As the Bulge deepened, that principle was tested beyond anything the medics had faced. German paratroopers, Waffen-SS units, and Volksgrenadiers poured through the snow, leaving behind hundreds of wounded as they advanced. And when those wounded fell into American hands, something extraordinary unfolded, a clash not of armies but of conscience. Behind the front lines, the U.S. field evacuation system worked with mechanical precision. Wounded soldiers were carried from the snow to aid stations, where medics performed triage under canvas tarps stiff with frost. From there, ambulances moved them to collecting stations and finally to evacuation hospitals, miles behind the lines. Within those tents, uniforms lost their meaning. Captured German troops, some frostbitten, others bleeding from shell fragments, were laid beside the Americans they had tried to kill hours before. The Red Cross flag above the hospital marked sacred ground, a space governed not by vengeance, but by medicine. At the 44th Evacuation Hospital near Bastogne, surgeons recalled treating dozens of Germans each day. "We couldn't tell who was who once we cut the uniforms away," one medic later wrote. "They all looked the same under the light, pale, afraid, human." This medical neutrality shocked many captured Germans. They had been told by Nazi propaganda that Americans tortured prisoners and shot the wounded. Yet, in those makeshift operating rooms, they received morphine, blood transfusions, and the same rations as Allied soldiers. At the height of the offensive, when snow clogged roads and air evacuation halted, American medics even borrowed German prisoners as stretcher bearers, not as slaves, but as partners in survival. For men raised to believe mercy was weakness, the experience left a mark deeper than any wound. Because in that frozen forest, the enemy's compassion became the first warmth they had felt in weeks. For the German soldiers who survived the Ardennes, their first encounter with American medics was often their first encounter with contradiction. Propaganda had painted the Americans as savages, degenerate mongrels, unfit for mercy or honor. Yet here, under flickering lanterns, they were being fed, bandaged, and spoken to with words of calm they didn't understand but could feel. Corporal Heinz Möller, captured near St. Vith, later recalled lying in a snowbank, half-conscious, expecting a bullet. Instead, he woke to an American medic cutting open his tunic and wrapping his wounds in gauze. "He called me buddy," Möller wrote years later. "I did not even know the word, but I knew what it meant." For the medics, mercy wasn't a choice, it was discipline. Each wore the Geneva Cross, a promise of neutrality that transcended nationality. They worked amid chaos, kneeling in mud, sharing their limited morphine and bandages equally among friend and foe. Some Germans wept openly as their enemy saved them. Others refused help at first until pain broke pride. The medics didn't argue politics. They gave plasma, stopped bleeding, whispered reassurance. It was the small acts that lingered, a hand brushed clean of mud, a cigarette shared after surgery, a blanket tucked under a shivering body. In a war of annihilation, these gestures carried moral weight far beyond their physical value. For many Germans, it was the first crack in a wall of ideology built since childhood, a moment when the enemy stopped being an image and became a man. And as word spread through the prisoner ranks, so too did confusion and a quiet kind of respect. Because what do you call a foe who saves your life? Behind the humanity lay an unspoken calculation, one that combined morality with military logic. The U.S. Army Medical Corps viewed mercy not as sentiment, but as order. To treat every wounded man, Allied or Axis, wasn't only ethical, it was strategic. Every life saved, even that of an enemy, reinforced the moral discipline that kept soldiers from descending into chaos. Medical neutrality became a cornerstone of Allied identity. The Red Cross armband meant protection under international law, but also under conscience. Commanders understood that once soldiers began deciding who deserved help, they stopped being soldiers and became something else entirely. German field doctrine differed sharply. In many Wehrmacht and Waffen-SS units, medical aid was prioritized for their own. Enemy casualties were often left until the field was secured. It wasn't always cruelty. It was policy shaped by limited resources and ideology. The Americans, with their vast logistics and medical supply chains, could afford compassion. Yet they practiced it not from abundance but from belief. The U.S. Surgeon General's office had issued clear directives. Medics must not discriminate by nationality, rank, or uniform. This instruction, carried in pocket manuals and briefed before every major operation, was unique among the combatants of World War II. In practice, it demanded courage equal to any battlefield charge. A medic who stopped to treat a wounded German under fire risked the same bullet as the man he tried to save. Many paid that price, killed while performing their duty of mercy. To heal in war was to resist war's logic itself, and yet from a command perspective, that resistance preserved something essential, the idea that civilization could still exist amid ruin, because without restraint, victory would mean nothing worth winning. December 23, 1944, near Bostonia. Snow swept sideways through the trees, the kind of blizzard that made sound disappear. The front line had dissolved into confusion, small pockets of men fighting, freezing, or falling silent beneath the white. In a ruined chapel that now served as an aid station, a group of American medics worked through the night. The roof was gone, only rafters remained, and the wind carried snowflakes into open wounds. Inside, the moans of the injured mixed with the hum of a portable generator powering a single lamp. They had 30 wounded on the floor, half American, half German. There was no distinction anymore, only triage tags and blood. Private Ralph Kling, a medic with the 20th Armored Infantry Battalion, later wrote that they operated on a captured German lieutenant who had been shot through the chest. "We used our last plasma on him," he recalled. "It didn't matter what flag he fought under, he was dying, and we were the only ones left to help." Outside, the shelling resumed. A mortar struck near the doorway, showering the chapel with dust and glass. The medics didn't move. They couldn't. One continued chest compressions. Another whispered the count beneath his breath. When the lieutenant's breathing steadied, the men exhaled as one, not a cheer, but a kind of stunned relief. A minute later, they turned to an American paratrooper with similar wounds and began again. For a few fragile hours, the war outside ceased to matter. It was replaced by something rarer, the shared instinct to save life, even when surrounded by death. But the morning would bring a new challenge, one that tested how far that mercy could stretch when the lines shifted once more. At dawn, the rumble of engines echoed through the fog, German half-tracks emerging from the tree line. The aid station, marked clearly with a red cross, now sat between advancing German troops and retreating American lines. The medics inside had no weapons, only stretchers and bandages. As the Germans surrounded the chapel, an officer stepped in, pistol drawn, uniform coated in frost. His eyes swept across the floor, wounded Germans lying beside Americans, all bandaged, all breathing. He hesitated. No one moved. The medics stood silently, white cloths stained crimson, their armbands the only color in the pale light. Finally, the officer holstered his weapon. He signaled his men to stand down and ordered in German, "Do not touch them." A captured medic later recalled that moment. "He saw what we were doing and nodded. He understood." Within an hour, both sides carried stretchers together, Americans and Germans, moving their wounded into shelter before renewed shelling. It was an unspoken truce born not of diplomacy but exhaustion and decency. When U.S. forces re-entered the sector days later, they found the same German officer still guarding the chapel, waiting for the medics' return. He handed over the wounded and saluted before walking back into the woods. That story, retold by survivors in post-war interviews, spread quietly among medical corpsmen. It became one of those moments no report could quantify, where the front line blurred and men chose to act as humans first, soldiers second. For those who witnessed it, the memory never faded. Because in that frozen ruin of stone and snow, amid all the machinery of destruction, mercy had briefly held the field. And its echo followed every convoy that carried the wounded away from Bostonia. When the snow finally melted and the Ardennes offensive collapsed, thousands of German prisoners were processed through Allied medical systems. Many arrived bandaged with American gauze, their identification tags marked with U.S. Med treated. Those letters meant safety, not privilege, but proof of life. At field hospitals across Belgium and France, captured German soldiers continued to receive care long after the fighting ended. Records from the U.S. Army Surgeon General's office show that in late 1944 alone, over 21,000 enemy wounded were treated by American medical personnel in Europe. The mortality rate among those patients was lower than what German facilities achieved under combat conditions. For many POWs, the shock lingered deeper than the pain. Inside the temporary hospital at Liege, one German officer reportedly asked a nurse, "Why do you save us? We would not have done the same." The nurse simply replied, "Because we can." These small exchanges began to ripple through the POW camps scattered across France, England, and the United States. In Camp Shelby, Mississippi, German prisoners remembered American doctors removing shrapnel from their legs, operations done without bitterness, even after the Battle of the Bulge's atrocities. Letters written home by these prisoners, censored but preserved, carried quiet astonishment. "They feed us, they heal us, they do not hate us, I do not understand." Those words were never meant for publication, yet they became living testimony to an idea stronger than propaganda. As months passed, the line between captor and captive blurred, replaced by a shared fatigue that only those who had seen too much could recognize. By the spring of 1945, the war's tide had turned irreversibly. The camps that once overflowed with captured Germans became quiet places of recovery and reflection. In the United States alone, over 370,000 German POWs were held, many of them former soldiers from the Ardennes and Normandy campaigns. American medical staff continued their care as if the war outside no longer mattered. POWs received vaccinations, dental treatment, and even physical therapy. Army reports describe rehabilitation programs where German amputees learned to walk again using U.S.-issued prosthetics, built in the same factories producing replacements for American veterans. These acts did more than heal bodies. They altered perceptions. When the war finally ended, thousands of repatriated Germans carried home stories of a different America, one that had fought fiercely yet treated them with decency. Historians later noted that this experience became a quiet foundation for West Germany's post-war reconciliation with the United States. Some former prisoners even returned voluntarily, decades later, to lay flowers at the small memorials built near former aid stations in Belgium and Luxembourg. A few wrote memoirs describing not their capture, but their rescue the night they were pulled from the snow by hands wearing the Red Cross. For those medics, few received medals. Their heroism was recorded not in citations, but in the continued heartbeat of the men they saved. And when peace finally settled over Europe, the field hospitals fell silent, the stretchers stacked, the tents folded, the Red Cross flags rolled and stored away. But the memory of what happened inside them, the quiet defiance of compassion amid chaos, endured long after the guns stopped. War has many victories, but few that speak to the heart. In the frozen stillness of the Ardennes, it wasn't a weapon or a general that defined civilization. It was the medic kneeling beside a wounded man, choosing to heal rather than hate. Those moments rarely made headlines or citations, yet they endured, carried in memories whispered decades later by men who once faced each other across the barrel of a gun. To the Germans who survived because of those medics, America's strength was no longer measured in tanks or bombers, but in restraint, in the refusal to surrender humanity to vengeance. Every transfusion, every stitched wound, every life preserved became part of a quiet rebellion against the nature of war itself. Because mercy, given freely in a place designed for death, becomes its own kind of victory, one that outlives borders, uniforms, and generations. The snow melted, the armies moved on, but the echo of that compassion remained. Somewhere in those woods of Belgium, beneath the roots and ruins, lies proof that even in humanity's darkest winter, there were still hands that chose to heal.